Hello, everyone, and welcome back for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets, and drama. So, you may have seen that I've started a bit of a tradition on this channel for Drag Race UK Season 6. For the episodes I'm doing for the Have Your Say, I'm bringing on a guest to talk with me about the episode, and this is no different. So, please welcome someone you may have heard of from TikTok and YouTube. He also has the best name in the world, I do say. Please join me in welcoming Matthew, aka belakboy.
Ciao. Hello,
Hi.
Matt.
Yeah, I mean we're named twins, although I go by Matt, you go by Matthew, but my real name is
hmm
technically Matthew, so we are named twins.
Right. The best name there is in the English language.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure having you on.
Of course. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to talk about this new episode with you. I've watched your videos for a couple years now, so I'm very excited to finally get this chance to actually talk face to face with you and kind of discuss this episode. This episode of a really good season too.
Yeah, so I would love to get into this episode. So obviously we're going to be talking about UK season 6, episode 5. So what we're
Mhm.
going to do is we're going to go quickly, we'll sort of recap through the episode, then get into what our thoughts are on each queen's individual performance in the maxi challenge, and then we'll do runway as well. And then afterwards we'll go through the results of my Have Your Say poll, where my audience get to vote on whether they agree with the outcome of the episode. And then I've also got some comments from my viewers as well, and I'll put them to you and we'll sort of discuss them as well.
Wonderful. I can't wait.
Okay, great. So let's sort of hop in. So obviously the episode starts, they come back in after the elimination last week, and obviously it's the same sort of thing. They're talking about the elimination and all that sort of thing. The thing I want to sort of get onto then is the mini challenge when they come back in the next day. So there's sort of a running theme, obviously, which we'll find out later, but it's sort of the Graham Norton show, and they're doing the pink chair challenge where they have to basically tell a joke or something funny, and then obviously Raven pulled the lever if it
Mhm.
wasn't very good. I was just curious, as someone who is not from the UK, I was just wondering how well known the Graham Norton show is outside of the UK.
So it's not widely watched specifically as an entire program. Nobody's going to sit down for an hour to watch the Graham Norton. I don't know how long it is. Nobody's sitting down watching the Graham Norton show for 30 minutes to an hour, but you will see clips from the show seep their way into pop culture on TikTok and Twitter, like of the highlights, like the RuPaul when he was on the show and he forgot what he was saying, or like the Judy Dench's and her funny stories. So those popular moments kind of really seep through into pop culture in America, but nobody watches the episodes in full. I've certainly never seen an episode in full, but
I was just wondering what your thoughts were on this mini challenge and whether you agreed with all of the levers, the lever being pulled every single time.
well, I love a good popsicle stick joke, like the jokes that are kind of like two nuns walk into a bar, or what do you call a rusty bus station, or whatever Marmalade said, or whatever, I love a good popsicle stick joke, but they're never laugh out loud funny, they're blow air out of your nose funny, you know um I thought it was a fun little, it in this episode, it was exactly what a mini challenge is supposed to be. Unserious, stupid, just for a good laugh with all the other gals. So none of the jokes were funny, but it was great to see sort of the girls have not a one-on-one, but have this rapport with Ravine and RuPaul. And so I thought it was a good fun time. And yes, I did call her Ravine purposefully.
I did gather that. I thought if you called her accidentally, that would have, I would have questioned your drag race sort of, I would have revoked your drag race card.
Never.
Yeah, I thought it was a fun mini challenge. Like you said, the jokes were very much, they weren't supposed to be sort of laugh out loud, but I thought they were fine.
Yeah,
And obviously, I think if I was in the pink chair, I'd also want to have the experience of falling backwards and everything anyway. So even if
right.
my joke was funny, I'd still want it to happen. So then we find out that the main challenge for this week is that the Queens are going to be doing a Graham Norton chat show with Graham Norton, and they sort of split into two groups. And what I thought was quite interesting about this is I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've ever had this challenge on Drag Race where it's been the queens being themselves, not a character that they were given. I know we've had things like
Mm,
this in the past, but usually they get given a character prompt and they have to almost do an acting
yeah,
challenge within it. And
like
am I
Rossi
right in that?
Bossi or Bossy Rossi. Yeah,
Yes.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head where they've done something specifically as their authentic selves on like an interview panel. Maybe there's been one. I can't think of anything even like internationally where they've done that. This does seem very kind of new and novel in terms of drag race challenges, which obviously is very exciting and fun to sort of see them experiment with the challenges they can give the girls.
Yeah, I really enjoyed. We'll go through the
Mhm,
actual sort of each person in a minute, but I really enjoyed the concept and I was quite excited to see how they do it. But I also felt like this is quite a hard challenge in a way because it's sort of a bit unclear what it actually is. Like, is it an acting challenge? Not really. Is it an improv challenge? I guess. But the whole point is it's supposed to be a natural sort of talk to, but there's no real aim to what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be funny, I guess, but you don't have to
mhm.
be. There was no sort of definition of what it is. And I think that almost
Yeah.
makes it harder.
This is what I love to call a personality challenge on Drag Race, where all it is just showcasing your personality. And if your personality doesn't click with the judges, then, well, sorry. And if your personality does click, well, great, good job. Your congratulations. Like that's kind of where where the vibe is, I think, for this challenge. But mm,
Let's actually sort of go into this first. Well, just I want to just quickly mention because there
mhm,
was a really poignant moment in the episode when Kyron was talking to Love One. Kyron was mentioning about a really horrific, horrible incident about
mhm.
abuse that happened when Kyron was younger. And I just wanted to mention that briefly to say I thought it was such a powerful moment. I'm so glad that they have these moments in Drag Race where they're talking and raising awareness about it. And I know
Mhm.
a few people mentioned it in the comments. So I just wanted to sort of talk about that and, bring attention to such an important topic.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I thought it was a very vulnerable moment with Kyron to sort of open up about this, especially um, Kyron being a younger queen. She kind of represents the sort of new age of queer culture where a lot of people who are lucky enough to grow up in environments where they can come out at an age such as 13, 14, which are relatively young compared to older generations of queer people. I think she kind of opened up about a struggle that a lot of people, that a lot of queer people our age have kind of experienced. I can speak from experience that that is not far off from the truth. Like this is something that kind of is a communal trauma, I think, for a lot of queer people of that age demographic. And I'm very proud that Kyron was able to open up about that because, we kind of learn and we kind of know in Drag Race that exposure is a great way to sort of let a lot of the people at home know they're not alone in these traumas or these experiences. So it was a very beautiful moment, and I'm very glad that the show took the time to highlight it and that Kyron was brave enough to share that. So,
Yeah, and I thought it was a really lovely, also authentic moment between two people from different generations, because I love
mhm,
one, Kyron, but it was also really, it was done really authentically and really nicely. So I was really, yeah, I really appreciated the dynamic that they had as well as the message behind it.
mhm,
So let's talk about then the actual challenge itself. So obviously they split into two groups. The first group had 5 people, the second group had 4 people. And obviously that was like a little bit of contention, a little bit as to why Kiki chose to put herself in the
mhm.
group with more people.
Sure.
Um,
Can I ask you, like, how do you feel about splitting them up in teams when there's an odd number of girls there?
I was a bit surprised that they did it on a week where they knew there would be an odd number of people because they could have done it last week or next week, and you would have had.
Hmm.
I don't I never know why they choose certain challenges for specific weeks. I mean, there must be a reason, but I did think it was a bit random to have on a week where you know there's going to be groups of uneven numbers.
Yeah, like that's always my pet peeve with Drag Race. They did it on Global All Stars as well during the girl group challenge where it was like 4, 3, and 3. It's like You could have done that at top 12 or whatever, like split it up evenly. That's just a pet peeve of mine. Come on, Drag Race producers.
So with group one, so group one was Lavoie, Kiki Snatch, Kyron Thrax, Lil, and Marmalade. So what we'll do is we'll go through each queen in order in which they spoke. So the first person we'll talk about was Lavoie. So what did you think of Lavoie's performance in the challenge?
So obviously, Lavoie, this was a runaway win for her. I think there wasn't anybody else who even came close to her in the performance in the challenge. One thing that really stuck out to me, though, was during the walkthrough before the challenge, the queens were asking RuPaul for her advice for the challenge. And she said something that really stuck out to me, where she was like, Graham Norton is one of the leading interviewers in the world. And she said, how are you going to take the lead? Lavoie, I think, easily took the lead, especially at the very beginning of the challenge. She didn't even let Graham Norton start the conversation. She immediately started the conversation with the banter with Graham, where she was like, I always like to say, like, interview with your fans, like that's sort of set the tone and easily pulled her ahead from the rest of the girls out of the gate, which I really resonated with. She obviously had a lot of punches there when other queens were talking, but also knew when to like pull it back, which was kind of one of the main tells of who did good versus who did bad in the challenge, whether or not they were able to sort of allow that space for the other girls to thrive, but also not letting the judges or the audience forget that you're there. So this was just an absolute blowout win for Lavoie for me. I think she cleared everybody else. It was spectacular.
I agree. I think she was just so natural, so funny. She was clearly just
Mm-hmm.
being herself. I don't think she sounded rehearsed or anything. And you can just tell this is kind of what she does. She lives for being an interview host or just a host in general or a guest and just talking about stuff. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
she was just so natural. And I thought the story that she told, because that's actually each of them had to tell effectively a story. And obviously
Mm-hmm.
they were given prompts that then got given to Graham to ask those questions. And obviously that, they must have been asked something like, tell us your most funny story. And then Graham would ask about it. So I thought she chose a really funny story that was easy to say and it wasn't too convoluted and it had enough punchlines and everything. And she's just so naturally funny. So yeah, for me, she was
Mm-hmm.
head and shoulders above the others. So then the next person in that group was Kiki Snatch. So what did you think of her performance?
So Kiki Snatch, the main critique she got was that the judges felt that she wasn't being herself, which might be a overgeneralization of how I remember the critiques. But the kind of general consensus was like she might have been being authentic, or sorry, she might have been being inauthentic, which I don't agree with. I don't think she was being inauthentic. It was just that for me, her story lacked structure. So there wasn't kind of like a lot to flow with, especially as an interviewer. And the other thing that I thought about Kiki Snatch is that she kind of played the entire challenge on the defensive, for lack of a better term, where she wouldn't let her story develop unless other people asked her questions to further develop the story. When I think there's more of like an offensive play here, where like, yes, you should try to bounce off people asking you questions, but you should also be very like dynamic and show initiative by like, oh yeah, I jumped out of a plane. And then, excuse me, instead of just saying I jumped out of a plane, stopping and waiting for somebody to be like, why'd you jump out of a plane? It was for charity. I think there was kind of like that should have been something that she should have incorporated herself into the story rather than relying on other people to sort of incorporate it for her. So that for me is where she floundered. So I do kind of agree with her being on the lower end of critiques this episode, but love her though. Love Kiki.
I agree. And I do, unfortunately, I do think she was probably the weakest. I do love her.
Hmm.
I kind of agree with what you're saying. I don't think she was being inauthentic. I think she was just really nervous and she didn't
Hmm.
know how to really bring the story out she was, I think, just in her head too much because in the confessional, she's actually really funny and really likable. And that just completely disappeared in the challenge. And she knew that she was under no illusion. She knew she didn't do that well. And
Yeah.
it's really sad to see someone who is naturally really funny and interesting not deliver. So unfortunately, I think
Hmm.
she was the weakest, unfortunately. And moving on to Kyron Thrax, what did you think of Kyron? Because I think Kyron's proved that she's very confident and she's pretty much good at everything so far. So what did you think that she lived up to that in this?
Yeah, I definitely do think that she kind of has this confident aura about her, this confident ambiance in her personality, where she kind of knows she's going into a challenge with her head held high. And even we haven't seen her do bad at anything, but I feel like even if she goes into a challenge where she thinks she's going to do bad, she's going to take it head on. That's kind of the type of person I see that she is. In this challenge, I thought she did good. I thought she did very passable. Like, it was different when, or sorry, it was difficult when you are on the same couch with somebody like with Lavoie or Marmalade, who's kind of like has these like really fun stories. And Kyron's story was funny. It's just I didn't find it memorable in comparison to a lot of the other girls that were there on that stage tonight. So I thought where she was this week, I thought she was deservingly safe. I thought, yeah, no, that's actually it.
I agree. Yeah, Kyron is very funny and she's naturally good at pretty much everything we've seen. We've never seen her do badly. I do think, like you said, I thought her story had a couple of funny punchlines, like when she
Mhm.
said we moved to doing jacket potatoes, but I couldn't fit them under the sofa. I thought that was like a really funny little punchline. So, things like
Mhm.
that, but it wasn't the most memorable. So, yeah, I think it was safe, but maybe not quite as memorable as some of the others, but still a good performance.
Yeah.
So then we had Lil next. What do you think of Lil?
So the thing I really liked about Lil is that she, like Lavoie at the start of the challenge, before Lavoie even told her story, is that she commanded attention first thing. And that's what I liked about Lil's story specifically, is that she immediately opened with this interesting framing that obviously piques the audience interest. Like, how can you not be immediately invested in a story where he said, it all started when I was bit by a pig? Like it's a fun little like just interesting story that I feel like the thing about Lil is, and I feel like I'm telling my critiques as if I was like Octavia telling her story. The thing about Lil is that she is a girl I know. She is that diva that I met at the back of the bar at 3 a.m. smoking a cigarette. You know what I mean? And so she's the type of person where no matter what she says, I'm immediately captivated because she just has that energy. And that's where I think that is why I think how do I phrase this? That's why I categorize this challenge as a personality challenge. It's how well can you incorporate your personality to captivate the audience. And I think Lil just did that perfectly here, framing the story about it was all started when I got bit by a pig. When she was like, it was like the hands of Jesus, like those sort of interesting quips that I think can invest a viewer into her story and her personality.
Agreed. Lil is just such a fascinating, interesting person. And what I thought was what Lil managed to do that I think was really successful was she didn't sound rehearsed. She sounded like a true guest on a chat show that she was just talking to
Mm,
people down the pub or in the bar.
mhm.
She was just telling a funny story. It didn't sound like she had really rehearsed this story, but even
Yes.
when people were kind of interrupting her or kind of jumping in with stuff, she managed to pick it back up so effortlessly and really instill
Mhm.
engage in the conversation.
Yeah. I didn't think about that. It really is like a conversation just with like a friend, like that really was the energy she was giving, which is great quality to have.
Yeah, so for me, Lil was definitely one of the top this week, not just in this group, but just in general. I thought she was just really funny, and it was a genuinely interesting, funny story as well.
Yeah. I went to Catholic school the next morning and I showed them my hair. Like it was like I can see that happen. It's so gorgeous. I love it.
Definitely. And then finally for this group, we had Marmalade. So what did you think of Marmalade?
So where Lil felt like she was not rehearsed, like she was just telling the story off the cuff to her friends, I did think that Marmalade was rehearsed, which I'm not saying as a slash against her. I think her story was very well rehearsed and she had some really good quips in there that like I think needed that structured rehearsed timing, like the Lorraine joke where she was like, oh, like Lorraine, like I think that needed to be rehearsed in order for it to work. So I think she understood that about her stories and about her interview. So that I thought was very well done. I also thought that she actually had a more challenging part. I didn't notice this until my rewatch, but I think she had a more challenging part in this Graham Norton interview because while the other girls had like, oh, my story was jumping out of a plane, my story was like I went to the wrong wedding. Graham Norton was like, so let's talk about like your personal life. Let's talk about your romance. And she so immediately had to talk about something more personal. But I also thought she was able to like sort of turn that into something like more. She was able to turn that into something expressive, which we saw and felt in the challenge. So I really liked how she was able to rise up to that sort of extra challenge that she had.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Thinking about it, yeah, the others had a story where she was just asked about her relationship, which is quite
Hmm.
difficult. But I feel like maybe she had prompted that, maybe just because she came back with such funny like quips every time that were, like you said,
Hmm.
were quite rehearsed. I feel like that would have been quite difficult off the cuffs, and maybe that was her prompt rather than a story. Maybe she just
Yeah.
said, "Ask me about my relationship." I don't know.
Hmm. I wonder, I really would love to see behind the curtain and sort of see like how the producers structured this challenge. Like, I want to know, did they ask the girls ahead of time, like, oh, tell us like a funny story and then we'll pull that for the challenge or something? I want to know like how they sort of decided to structure this.
So I saw an interview with Kiki, and I believe it was with
Okay.
Metro. And they do kind of exit interviews for the queens after they've been eliminated. And she said, if memory serves me correctly, that they had to give a prompt for something that they want to, what would be a funny story to talk about. And then they said, "Great, we'll
Oh,
just ask the questions." But they were asked in advance to give a prompt.
okay. So they were kind of like setting themselves up for like their story. Okay, I see. I was just
So
wondering if they were pulling random stories from their like audition tapes or something.
yeah, I mean that maybe that is also true, but she said they were asked to give a prompt. So
Okay.
with Marmalade, I do agree. I think it's quite difficult to compare her performance in a way to others because hers was clearly rehearsed and it did come
Mhm.
across a little bit more like like a stand-up comedy routine, almost a
Mm-hmm.
little bit. It was very funny
Yeah.
and she did nail it, but it didn't come across to me as being a guest on a chat show because it was almost so rehearsed. So I that was I'm a little bit on the fence as to how I don't know if I can compare it to the others. It was good, but I don't think it deserved a win in the sense because it wasn't as natural as Levoir. But if it had been a stand-up comedy challenge or a roast, it would have been really good. But it just
Yes.
felt a tiny bit too rehearsed to me, but it was still very
Hmm.
funny.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Okay, so let's move on to group two, which was the smaller group. So which was Octavia, Chanel, Chara, and Relisa. So let's go with Octavia first because she was the first to speak. What did you think of
Hmm.
Octavia?
So I agree. I'm just gonna say this right out. I agree with her being in the bottom this week. And like I said, similar with Kiki, I don't think she was being inauthentic, but I do think that she was kind of struggling with the specific structure of her story. She kind of started off by she kind of started off early in her story by tripping over her words, and so therefore she kind of like it kind of tripped her up for the rest of the story all to come. And I think she kind of knew that and was cognizant of that, and that's why it kind of was this like cycle of her being like, "Oh my God, I just messed up. I hope I don't mess up again." But then she's so focused on not messing up again that she trips up again. So I think that's kind of where she snowballed a bit into a sort of convoluted story that I think she was getting so caught up in like all the logistics and specifics of it that she wasn't really doing well to exhibit her personality during the challenge. So unfortunately, she was one of my bottoms this week as well.
Unfortunately, I do have to agree. I think her bottom placement was deserved. I love Octavia. She's such a fun contestant. But I do, as you said, I think she tripped up on her words. And I know what that's like when you trip up once and then you keep tripping because you're thinking about it. And I could see she was just getting in her head. And her story, I didn't quite. It was a bit like you said, it kind of didn't really go anywhere because it was a fun story
Hmm.
about being drunk and losing your suitcase, but it wasn't enough that you really can latch onto it because we've all probably done something like that.
Hmm.
So I wonder if there was more to the story that she didn't get to because I don't know, it didn't quite work for me, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
love Octavia, but just it wasn't her
Love.
best week. So next we have Chanel O'Connor. What do you think of Chanel?
I gotta be so honest. No notes. I think she did fine. I think she did fine. I don't remember her story that much. You know, she definitely for me faded in the background this challenge, which I think for a challenge like this is better than doing bad. But I really have no notes. There wasn't really much here that I had. So good job, Chanel. You definitely passed.
So yeah, Chanel, I think Chanel's definitely I really like Chanel. I think she's really funny and she's definitely brought the drama
Hmm.
this season. One thing I thought was really interesting is so Chanel has a YouTube channel that she's sort of started, I think, or at least it's sort of I've only noticed it since she's been on the show. And she
Okay.
does recaps of the episode, but from her perspective.
Okay.
And so you should, yeah, people should go and check it out. And I watched the video she did for this episode, and she said a few quite interesting things. So she said that when Charity said earlier in the episode, like, "Oh, you speak too much," and we saw in the episode that she kind of was not happy about that. Chanel said that that really did mess her up because
Mm.
apparently she really felt like all the queens were constantly making her the butt of the joke, and that even off screen, maybe that people were telling her she spoke too much and things like that. So she said that that really affected her. So when she was on stage, she couldn't get out of her head that she shouldn't be speaking too much or speaking over people. And that's why she said,
Hmm.
in her, this is according to her, she said that's why she faded into the background. And she
Okay.
also said that she was rehearsing so much in her room, in her hotel room,
Uh,
the production team apparently thought that she had snuck a mobile phone into her hotel room because she was talking so much and they could hear her through the door. Apparently, they were all listening in the door to try and figure out if they could hear two voices because she was talking so much. And then they eventually, I think the next day or whatever, they asked her and she was like, "No, I didn't have a phone. I was just talking to myself." So they thought she had a phone, but
uh-huh.
she didn't. But I thought that was really interesting. And she also
Yeah.
said that
That's
they
a
asked for prompts as well. And that's what
uh-huh.
she prompted. And she also posted on Twitter, I think it was, that she said the story about the alien model was true. And she posted a
Hmm.
photo of the model because I think she must have taken a photo of it. So she said
Yeah.
it is 100% a true story.
Yeah. I mean, I get it, girl. I get it, girl. I would see a xenomorph in the bedroom and I'd say, yeah, I'm staying. I'm staying tonight.
But like you said, I agree. It was like she was fine, not that memorable. I thought
Yeah.
because Chanel has been such a big personality, I did think there was going to be a little bit more to her story.
Hmm.
But giving what she said about getting in her head because of Charity's comments, I can kind of see. But at the same time, Chanel did kind of do the same thing to Chara in the first or second episode. So
Hmm.
yeah, I can see why.
That's
But at the
fine.
same time, it was also,
Yeah, it's like you know how things are said affects different people in different ways, you know. So if that's how she kind of processed Charity's comments, that's her tea. That is Chanel's tea, and she's allowed that, and I think that's her truth. Um, but yeah, I could see where you're coming from. It's giving a little getting a little hypocritical. No, I'm not going to go there. Nope. That's
I,
fine.
I think she said, but Chanel said, like, obviously this was filmed so long ago, they're all fine now. I don't
Yeah,
think there's any sort of
right.
bad blood. But yeah, unfortunately, I think this wasn't Chanel's strongest week, but I don't think she was bottom two worthy, but maybe
No.
bottom three. Then we had Charity. I actually thought this was quite an interesting performance. So let me know what you thought about Charity.
Yeah, so I don't agree with her being low in this challenge. I think she was actually a victim of the edit. I think they were trying to gaslight us into thinking she did horrible. I thought she was personable. I thought she had a good, funny quips in there. I liked her story, and she also was able to bounce off the other girls pretty well. That I think not really many other people besides Lavoie did. Like when she did like the "What's grinder," that thing during Chanel's story. It's like she had moments where she was able to insert herself in other people's stories without taking away the spotlight. So I think she did very good there. My only critique about it is that it just got a little long-winded. I think her first story just went on a little bit too long. And then I think also the one-two punch of her first story going on a little too long, as well as her being the only person to get a second story. I think that's kind of where the drawbacks of her performance in the challenges are. But other than that, I thought she did good. I thought she bantered well, and I thought she had interesting framing of her story. So I would have put her as safe, probably. I don't think she deserved to be in the bottom myself.
No, I agree. I actually was I glad you mentioned that. So I also felt like they definitely edited her, but I thought a little bit shady. Like they kept, yeah, her story was long, but they kept obviously doing that little, like the shade noise
Hmm.
and then flipping to RuPaul or to Graham looking very much like what's going on. But I don't
Yeah.
think actually it was. I thought she was funny. She was the only person, like you said, that got a second question, probably because their group had one less person. But I thought she
Hmm.
was funny. I thought her stories were funny. The thing about the first story about her saying, "Oh, the dancing queen, no refunds." If she had shortened that, it was actually a funny story. She could have probably made it a bit funnier. But then the thing about the
I
Cliff
agree.
Richard was actually really funny. So that I thought actually Chara did pretty well, and I would not have put her. So I actually think maybe she was almost one of the better ones in that. Like maybe she was the best in that group in a way. So
I I think she was second best. I do think the remaining person that we're going to talk about was better, but yeah, I agree with you.
well, let's move on to the remaining person, which was Releasa Slave. So what did you think of
Mhm.
Releasa?
So the thing that I really enjoyed about Release's performance is that, and I think this is sort of characteristic of who Releasa is as a person, but I liked how her personality during the challenge was more laid back and sort of cool and easygoing, compared to every single one of the other girls, all the rest of the girls that were kind of giving this like they were all sitting up straight, cross-legged, sort of in the challenge and kind of like giving more poised answers. Where Releasa, she was literally laid back, kind of had her arm over the sofa cushion, like she was taking this very easy. And I think that sort of set her up for success because obviously, A, she's giving you a different energy from the other girls, which allows her to stand out. And two, I think it also sort of helped her story a lot. I don't think her story had as many funny quips as some other girls' stories were, but I also don't think that her story required there to be funny quips. It was more about like the shock value of like this straight man getting a boner when Releasa did a performance, like, and I think that her energy matched where that story was, which I thought really helped her case. So she was my favorite of the group, I think, of her group, but I do think she did pretty well. And I love Releasa, so I'm gonna be biased no matter what.
No, I love Releasa. Releasa is definitely. I think she's going to be top four for me. She's
Hmm.
definitely up there. She's amazing. I agree with what you're saying. I think all the other three came across a bit like deer in the headlights a little bit. They didn't, there was a different energy in that group that they all seemed quite nervous. Whereas Releasa, like you said, was just laid back. She sat back like she was telling a story. She almost
Hmm.
came on like she thought she truly believed that this was the Releasa show, not the Graham Norton show. And that's what you need to do. And you can relax watching someone like that because you feel at ease watching someone who is also at ease. So I thought she did a very good job. And it was also a funny, interesting story as well.
Hmm. Exactly.
Okay, so that's obviously all of the performances, and I think as we've said, I think Lavoie probably was head and shoulders above everyone else, so she was
Hmm.
my favorite. Let's move on to the runway for this week, and the theme was "How's your headpiece?" So obviously all about headpieces. So we've both got reference images. So if we pull up the reference images, and what we'll do is we'll go through each person's runway. And what I like to do is someone suggested this in the last video in the comments, which I quite liked. So we'll do yay, nay, or just okay.
Okay. Exactly.
No, because I used to do yay or nay, and then someone suggested just okay as the other one. I was like, oh, actually, that's such.
Hmm.
I'd never thought of that bit, but yeah, that's really good. So thank you, whoever you are. I'll see if I can find the comment because that was a really good suggestion. So
Uh-huh.
we'll go through. We'll just say yay, nay, or just okay. And if you have any specific comments about the outfit, then feel free.
Sure.
So first, we'll go in order in which they appeared. So first up, we had Marmalade.
Marmalade, this is a yay for sure. I really like the references, the sort of Ziegfeld, Bahali's, the retrofuturism. It gave like drag in Metropolis. That's kind of where it was going for me. So I really love that. So this is a yay.
Me too. This was by far, I mean, we'll get onto this in a minute, but it may be my favorite, to be honest. It was just so well done, so cool. And it really fit the theme as well of headpiece. Like you
Hmm.
look at this and you know exactly what it was. So yeah, this was definitely a
Right.
yay. Then we had Kiki Snatch.
Kiki, I'm gonna give this a just okay. I thought the dress was gorgeous. I like the ballerina, the angelic part of it, but of course the category was headpiece. I liked the front of the headpiece, but the structure in the back where it was kind of laying flat at her whatever the back of your head is called, that kind of took me out of that a little bit. So I'm going to give this a just okay.
I think I'd have to agree. It is a beach. I think this is the best that she looked on the show. She looked amazing here, but I don't think it
Dragger.
was. I don't think it was quite as good as some of the others in terms when you looked, it wasn't quite as impressive, but it was still a beautiful look,
Hmm.
and I loved the colors of it. And she sold it really well. It just
Hmm.
wasn't quite my favorite, but it was still a good look.
Yep.
Then we had Lil.
Lil, this is a yay. What's like better than a yay for your channel? What's like
Oh, that's a good. I'm not sure I've really
a
thought about
slay?
it. A sleigh.
I
There,
don't
yeah, there you go.
know.
The answer was right in front of us.
Yeah, for me, this was definitely my favorite runway look of the week. I thought this was gorgeous. I obviously love purple velvet. I think the structure of this is gorgeous. The headpiece is spectacular. The masquerade ball mask, gorgeous. This is by far no notes, like an almost perfect look. I love it.
I agree. It was the most interesting. I think Marmalades was impressive and beautiful, but this one was just so interesting and it's so Lil. You think this is
Hmm.
exactly what Lil would wear for this runway. I loved the colors. I loved the structure of it. And it was just so interesting to look at. And yeah, so for me, this was, yeah, maybe I would also give it a slay actually, or definitely a yay because it was
Hmm.
lovely. And I love the cut. Purple is one of my favorite colors. So it just always looks so good.
Yeah.
So. Then we had Lavoie. What do you think of Lavoie?
Lavoie, this was a yay. This was a really good look. It might be like kind of one of my favorite looks of Lavoie so far. I really liked it. It's very inspired by like those 1950s showgirls, like almost straight out of I Love Lucy. I thought the colors she chose were very well done. Yeah, this is a yay.
I agree. It's also a yay. It's very headpiece. You can't deny what it. You know exactly what this is, and it's not
Right.
very typical for Lavoie in a way because she hasn't really done this style before. So I really appreciated that she did something different, but it was also really
Hmm.
well done. So yeah, I agree. No
Oh
notes.
yeah.
Loved it. Then we had Kyron Thrax.
Hiring Thrax. So I'm gonna give this a tentative yay. I like it. It's very like 1980s horror, grotesque experiment gone wrong, which I like that vibe. I don't know why, but I did not like the vinyl material that she chose. And the other critique I had was it cracks me up, but the little white ribbon that she had at the back of her corset, behind like at the back of her corset, there's like a little white ribbon that's just so noticeable. So I'm gonna dock off points for that. But I am still going to give this a yay, specifically for vision, specifically for thinking outside of the box. And I do think specifically the execution of the headpiece is very well done. So I am going to give her a yay.
I agree. I think it's a yay, but for me, it's sort of slightly, it's a soft yay. I mean, I love
Hmm.
Kyron. She's always gives good looks. It's very conceptual. I did see she
Yes.
posted a video about how she made the look and she had to like mold her face and things. It was there a lot of effort obviously went into making it, which I think is massive
Hmm.
props to her. But like you said, I don't think it didn't scream headpiece to me in a sense and it's such an unusual look. It's quite difficult to compare, but it still looks good and
Sure.
it's very Chiron. Then we had Chanel O'Connor. What do you think of Chanel?
So Chanel, I'm going to give a just okay. I think this is a look, it's perfectly fine. Headpiece is good, but this isn't a look I'm going to be thinking about 2 days from now, as compared to Lil or Marmalade, where I think I'll be thinking about those looks for like a long, long time. Chanel O'Connor, I think this was kind of like a look that I'm not going to remember after a while, which is not a bad thing. That's neither good, that's neither bad. It's just a fact. I think she looks good. The body is wonderful. I like the headpiece. I think it's a very well made garment, but so I'm going to give it a just okay.
Yeah, I agree. I love the actual color of it. I think black with
Yes.
like the gold always looks good. It looks really classy. And then we had Releasa Slaves. What do you think of Releasa?
So I liked this. This is another example, though, I will say that like when I look at the look, my first thought isn't headpiece. But I do really like this look. I do think that she, as she said, was kind of bringing that. What were the words she used? She said like Caribbean flavor, or what did she say? But I really love when a queen would try to like embrace their Caribbean heritage in sort of this way. I think it does look really gorgeous. I think her body is. I think she has an amazing body. The only thing I don't like specifically is the hair. But the rest of the looks, I love the feathers, which I hope are ethically sourced. But I think this is a really good look. I'm going to give this a yay.
Yeah, it's really difficult because it's I think it as a look, if you showed it to me, I'd say this is a yay because I think it looks amazing. I think Relisa always kills it. She looks so good all the time. My only thing is if you don't get the runway theme from the outfit, can you give it a yay? I don't know. So for me, I'm a bit like it's a beautiful look, but does it fit the runway theme as much?
Yeah,
I would have got wings from it rather than headpiece. So for that
right.
sense, I'm not sure if I maybe have to give it a just okay, but if it was just a look
Okay.
on its own, it would be a yay.
Wow, dragger.
No, I love Relisa. She's one of my favorites. It's just this. It doesn't fit the theme.
Mm.
Sorry, but it just doesn't quite fit the theme. But beautiful look though. Then we had Actavia. What do you think of Actavia?
Yeah, I'm actually going to give this a yay. I think it's cute. I think it's avant-garde. Like this is the sort of look. This is a sort of look that like Vogue would like rank 56th on like their like ranking of the most recent Met Gala or something like that. You know, like it's very. I would see this at the Met Gala, but not like one of the world famous Met Gala looks. I think this is cute. I'm gonna give this a yay. Yeah,
I would give it a yay. Again, headpiece. I think it is headpiece in a way, but as I said, it maybe if it was a bit bigger, it would be more.
yeah,
It looks more like a hat. But I loved the fact that
yeah.
she incorporated the A into it, obviously on the outfit, but also the headpiece because she does the A on her eyebrow as well.
Hmm.
I think it was a really interesting look. And like you said, it did look very avant-garde, very editorial because of the shape of it. It wasn't just the
Yes.
typical sort of like, cutting in it the way. It's almost shapeless, but it does have a shape. And I think those are quite
Yeah.
interesting.
Good.
And then finally we had Charity. What do you think of Charity?
Charities, I like this look. I like this look. I'm gonna give it a yay. I don't really have many critiques about it. This is literally just what I would have done. I think I would have put more gumballs around the bodice. But that's just like the most minor nitpick I could ever think of in my entire life. This is for sure a yay. I think there's a creative vision here. So yeah, she did very well, I thought, in this runway.
Yeah, agreed. I love this. I love the concept. I love everything about it. I think it was executed really well. It was a really fun concept. You see that and you know exactly what it is. Okay, so obviously that's the episode. That's sort of the episode. We'll quickly just run through. So the winner is announced as Lavoie, which maybe not that surprising. We'll kind of get into that a little bit
Hmm.
more in a minute. And then the bottom two were Kiki Snatch and Actavia, and they lip sync. And then unfortunately, Kiki is told to sashay away. But we'll kind of get into our thoughts a little bit about that in a minute when we go through the Have Your Say poll. But just to recap that is what happened in the episode. Okay, so let's move on to my Have Your Say poll. And I'll go through and Matthew does not know the results of this. So this is his
Mm-mm.
blind reaction. So obviously I asked my audience to vote on particular things. So I'll read out the results of that and we'll get your opinion on whether you agree with my audience.
Okay.
Okay, so question one was which group was the best in the chat show? So obviously the group one was the bigger group, group two was the smaller group. Group one got 98.1%, and group two got 1.9%.
Well, yeah. No, I would have voted for the group one too.
Yeah, to me, it was very obvious that group one was better in general.
Hmm.
It was stronger performances. So yeah, to me, this was quite
Yeah.
obvious. Question two was who did the best overall in the chat show, regardless of groups.
Oh, can't wait to see how this turns out.
So we had 87.7% for Lavoie. Then we had 5.7% for Lil, and then 4.4% for Marmalade.
it's not a 100% for Lavoie. Like,
It
I'm
was
actually surprised by those numbers.
87.7%.
I'm surprised that Lavoie didn't get at least 90, I will say.
I was also kind of surprised, I guess, because maybe people just really like Lil and Marmalade, so there probably was
Right.
only a couple of votes in it, I would imagine.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think to me, Lavoie was very clear the obvious. She was the obvious person. We all expected
Yeah.
her, or at least I did. I expected her to do well, and she did. So to me, this was she kind of trounced the others, to be honest.
Oh,
So
yeah. Curb stomped.
so, question three was who had the best runway? And we had 36.2% for Marmalade,
Okay.
17.7% for Lil, and then 15.8% for Charity.
Okay. Yeah, I'd agree with that. That's like that. I feel like I would pick the same ones for sure. Like Lil, I raved and raved for minutes about Lil's look. I think this is the best look of the runway. Marmalade, obviously, close second. And then yeah, Charity. I would probably also throw up, honestly, Lavoie and Octavia. I think I would put them up a little higher as well. But I agree with the top three.
So, question four was do you agree with the winner? And we had 92.4% for yes and 7.6% for no.
I want to know what the 7.6% of people, why they thought no. Like,
Well, that is so. Question five, moving on, is
oh,
if you answered no to the previous question, as in you did not agree with the winner, who should have won instead?
oh.
So most people voted for NA because that's for people who did agree. So that
Hmm.
so 89.9% said NA, which makes sense. The next person after that who they voted for was Marmalade, who got 4.1% of the vote of that remaining. And then was Lil with 3.3. So it was
It
only
was definitely
those it was only those two. Everyone else got such small numbers that it doesn't actually show up.
was didn't even matter. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, those were definitely the runners up of the runner ups of the challenge. I love them,
Yes.
but they're definitely the runner ups. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Not the winner, but it's very strong performance from both of them.
Hmm.
Question six was do you agree with the bottom two? We had 92.4% for yes and 7.6% for no.
You seem to have like consistent answers, I feel like. Yeah.
These
Um,
this I think this week also was quite obvious. I do think this wasn't a particularly
yeah.
controversial week. It was quite obvious, and I think the judging was pretty fair.
Has there been a controversial episode of UK6 so far with your fans that voted?
Not UK6, I don't think. On global,
Okay.
there was. I mean, there was a lot. On global, there was a lot. So,
On Global, I'm sure it was every other episode.
but on UK so far, I think it's been pretty because I think the judging has been pretty consistent and fair. So this has been pretty, I would say, yeah, consistent
Hmm.
this season.
Yeah.
So moving on to question seven, which is related, it was if you answered no to the previous question, as in you did not agree with the bottom two, who should have been in the bottom instead? Again, ignoring NA, which was obviously the majority because that's people who did agree. The next person was Chanel O'Connor, got 3.8. And then Charity got 2.7.
Notice how Charity was lower in this poll than where she should have been in the challenge.
Yeah, personally, I don't think that I think they tried to make it look like she should have been in the bottom, but I don't actually think she should have. But then I was trying to think who
Yeah.
would I have put in the bottom instead of her? I think Chanel, yes. Chanel was, I think, the third
Yeah,
bottom for me, but I'm not sure who
for
I would
sure.
have replaced Chara with, like, who did better or sorry, who did worse than Chara.
Yeah, I definitely like Octavia and Kiki for sure lip syncing, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But kind of that low placement, I could see being contested with Chanel for me, over Charity. But I feel like I've been dogging on Chanel. I actually like Chanel, but this episode I don't think was her strongest point.
Question eight was who won the lip sync in your opinion? And we had 78.8% for Actavia and then 21.3% for Kiki Snatch.
I would agree. I do think Octavia won, but if I were judging, I think I would have double Shantaed this one. I think both did very, very well in the lip sync that especially for that song that they were given, I think this would have been a double Shantae for me.
And then finally, question 9 was who is the front runner, i.e., the most likely to win the season, in your opinion? And we
Oh,
had
Kyron. Oh, sorry.
75.2% for Kyron Thrax. Then can you guess who was second?
I'm gonna guess Lil. I think the fans would want to vote for Lil.
No, Lil
Lavoie.
was fourth or fifth, I think. It was
Lavoie.
Lavoie with
Okay.
13.6. And then after that, it was Release of Slaves with 4.6%.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. That energy of that top four feels correct, you know.
Yeah, so, well, according to this, it would have gone Kyron, Lavoie, Relisa, Marmalade fourth, and then Lil
Oh,
was
never mind.
fifth.
Oh, well, they can't always be right. They can't always be right.
So let's move on to the comments. So these comments were from the Have Your Say poll. So I don't know who said this because these are all anonymous. So
Mhm.
I've picked out a sort of a representative because a lot of people said similar stuff. So I picked out a representative and also a couple of maybe controversial ones as well to sort of stimulate
Oh.
conversation. So there were a lot of comments saying about Lavoie, saying this is what Lavoie does best, and saying that she did a great job this week. And no one can argue with that. That's definitely true. A lot of comments, which you mentioned this earlier, a lot of people, someone said, for example, this could have been a double save, but they already had non-eliminations episodes, so that's why they couldn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing trying to map out where episodes are and how many double saves you have in a single season and how many eliminations you can have in a season. And I think the final goal for any season of Drag Race should have either a top four or a top three. I think since this season only started off with 11 queens, they only started off with 11. They have a little more wiggle room to work with. So I think they do have room for one more double Shantae. I haven't done the math in my head, but I do think they have one more double not or sorry, they have one more non-elimination under the belt to play, but I think they're probably saving that for like a really notable lip sync, but I'm not sure.
A few people mentioned about Charity being not bottom worthy and saying she should. Someone said, I actually thought Chara was in the top and I'm surprised she got bottom. Someone else said, Charity got so much screen time this episode, which was interesting because she feels like an underdog, but I don't know if she'll make it to the end with so many powerhouse queens.
Hmm. Well, that's a big statement about Charity right there. I definitely agree with the sentiment that I would not have put her in the top. I think Lil, Lavoie, and Marmalade were kind of like a runaway tops for me. But I would have put Charity as safe. I think it is a little reductive to say a queen won't go far in a season with all these powerhouses. I do agree that there are a lot of powerhouses here, but I don't want that to be used in a way to sort of restrict the talents of what Charity can have. We kind of haven't seen a lot of her this season, and I think we should we should hope the best for her. That's kind of my sentiment towards it, and I think we should carry that for every single queen on this season. That's my thought on that. So I think she can surprise us. I don't think she'll win, but I think she can surprise us. I think every drag artist on this cast has the chance to surprise us, and I think we should expect not expect that, but I think we should keep that in mind when engaging with the season of Drag Race.
Drag her. She's not going to win. Drag her. And then the final comment, which was it's a little bit shady, but I thought it was an interesting topic, perhaps. Someone said Chanel is getting by a bit easy. She should have been low 2 weeks in a row. I don't mean to diminish her talent, but I think that production has been saving her a bit to keep the drama.
I don't agree with her being low last week. Yeah, I myself would not have put Chanel as low over Marmalade or in the bottom over Zahira and Lil. So I think she was deservingly safe there. Here, I would have put her as low, but it's not, I don't see production bending itself over backwards to like protect Chanel. I think Chanel has kind of been exactly where she should have been in the competition so far. That sounded bad, but what I mean by that is I think she's deserved every placement she's got so far, except for the most recent episode, except for this episode. I do think she is bringing good TV. But there are some seasons out there where you can feel production bending over backwards, doing whatever they can to protect a queen. I don't think that's happening with Chanel. I think Chanel is performing pretty well. And she has not done so bad in a challenge that I would have put her as lip syncing over anybody else. So I don't agree with that. I think she is great TV as well as where she should be in the competition.
I don't agree that they're keeping her to keep the saving her to keep the drama, but I do think that's probably a factor on Drag Race
Sure.
in general. Because if I was a producer, this is how I always think of it. If I was a producer and I wanted to make the most dramatic, interesting show, would I save a queen, even if maybe they did worse in a week than another queen, if that queen is more interesting TV than another queen? Probably
Yeah.
yes.
The thing about this cast too is I don't think they need Chanel to give good TV. I think Chanel has been a central figure in a lot of the drama this season, but I also think that all these other queens are capable of giving good TV without her there either. So, and I think the producers would be cognizant of that. I think they could get rid of Chanel and still get some like really juicy drama from the rest of these girls, or they could keep Chanel and still get juicy drama. I think they are going to get juicy drama either way. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how it develops. But I do really like Chanel. I think she's bringing interesting drama, but she's also doing well in the competition. And even if this
Hmm.
week wasn't her strongest week, she still did really well because the level of the cast is just so high that
Hmm.
even if you're low, you still were good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for going through this episode. It was so lovely to have you on. I was wondering if you could give me your prediction right now if you had to say who are top four and who you think is going to win.
So I think I've kind of alluded to it before earlier in the episode. I think the top four will be Kyron, Lavoie, Relisa, and Lil. I think Kyron is going to win. However, I want Relisa to win. That's who I would pick to win of who's left. But that's kind of where I see this season as going right now.
And if it had to
How
go
about
down
you?
to a top two,
Oh,
who's the top two then? Is it Kyron and Relisa for you?
if I had to pick my favorites, Kyron and Relisa, but thinking I think the central figures are probably going to be Kyron and Lavoie.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Kyron and Lavoie just from what we've seen. They're the two biggest
Hmm.
sort of personalities, and I think it's also the juxtaposition of like an older and a younger queen. I think that could
Yeah,
work really well. Although I really like the other contestants, I do think it's going to be Kyron and Lavoie. So,
yeah.
well, thank you so much for being on. I was just wondering if there's any sort of crazy people out there who are not following you on social media. I was wondering if you could tell us where they can find you and the sort of content that you do.
Yeah, so I'm most active on TikTok. I make content about every franchise of Drag Race. I try to go as international as I possibly can with every franchise. On TikTok, I am at belakboy. And then on YouTube, I also make a lot of video essays about international franchises of Drag Race. And on YouTube, I'm also belakboy. And then you can also see me just post a stream of consciousness on Twitter at it's belakboy. And then my Instagram is belak_met_. I have a lot of fun projects coming up. I'm currently working on a YouTube video for Drag Race Philippines season 3, so that will be coming out very soon. The best season of the year, don't at me. And I'm very excited to sort of get that content out for everybody to watch.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And yes,
Thank you for
I'll
having
put your
me.
links in the comments. People can come find you. Um,
Absolutely.
and I was
Thank you
just
so much for
wondering.
having me. Oh, yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
thank you. No, you're very
Yeah.
welcome. It's so lovely to have different people come on and get because everyone brings their own perspective and everything. And I really liked your
Mhm.
content before, and you always pop up on stuff when I'm doing my videos. So I was like, I've got to ask Matthew to come on.
Thank you. I appreciate the charity work.
And I was just wondering if you could see us out by maybe summarizing this week's episode in one word.
I'm trying to think something witty. I don't know. Good.
Well, there you go. That is, it does work. It was a good episode. Thank you so much, Matthew. Bye.
Bye.